Hello everyone. Sorry, just to say, so welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know who are watching, I'm Councillor Kimberly Barrett. I'm the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and the Environment. Just a few housekeeping rules first. Please be assured we've put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. Public seating has been made available. Can I please ask members and officers to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting? If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use a lift and try and assemble near the Queen Victoria statue in the Guildhall through all those graduation people. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building after the meeting today. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including anyone making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it will neither disrupt the meeting nor record those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please, can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished? We've all read the report, so if officers can highlight any developments that have occurred since publication, that would be welcome. So perhaps we'll start with introductions. So I will go this way this time, so I'll start with you here, Russell.
Councillor Russell Simpson, Hillsey Ward.
Speak up. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Zoe White, Green and Healthy City Coordinator.
Bethan Mose, Public Health Principal.
I'm Andrew Waggett, I'm the Head of Energy Services.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
Jane Dodino, Local Democracy Officer.
Councillor Charlotte Gerardo for Central Southsea.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. So I think we'll jump straight into the first report, because I know everyone's already... Oh, sorry, yes, my apologies. Has anyone got any interest at all today that they want to declare? No, sorry, my brain is too hot, sorry. Right, so in that regard, we will jump straight into the first agenda item, please. So, Bethan, is it you presenting today? Or yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll keep this brief. I'll just bring a summary of the paper that has been submitted and then answer any questions. So, as members are aware, a budget allocation was made to this portfolio to support greening across the city. The funding is limited, and but there are significant opportunities to make the best use to maximise greening across the city, whether that's working with community groups, schools, with transport schemes, or on PCC-owned housing land. We are developing a process to deal with bids for funding, something which has not previously existed. We want to make sure that we award funding in a consistent and a fair and transparent manner, and that all projects we provide funding to are delivering on the strategic objectives for greening, which are set out in a range of policy documents, not least the greening strategy, but also the emerging local plan, transport policy, and the developing climate change strategy too. So this paper articulates the first step of a broader framework for funding that we're developing over the summer, and the aim is to bring back to this decision meeting next time round, which I believe will be in October. And this is in time for an initial autumn planting funding round. Appendix B to the paper sets out the criteria that funding applications will need to use and demonstrate that they can meet. And I'll just briefly explain what Appendix B covers. Part A is basically affords the applicant the opportunity to demonstrate how the proposed scheme meets the priorities which we'll set out as part of any given funding round. These priorities might change, the priorities will be evidence-based, and in terms of the funding round proposed for autumn, we'll be working through the priorities for that round over the summer. Part B sets out the greening strategy objectives. Applications must deliver on the greening strategy, but it is not expected that any individual application will meet them all. The weighting given to the assessment of applications is under development at the moment. Part C is the essential criteria. All applications must demonstrate evidence in support of all criteria, or they will not be considered. And this is to ensure the best use of public funds and that any funding awarded stands up to legal and financial scrutiny. So the purpose of today's paper and the reason why we're asking for a decision is to agree this criteria, and then over the summer we'll be developing the broader framework, which will set out the priorities for autumn funding, which will be evidence-led, the assessment process, so scoring, the assessment panel will be taking procurement advice, and how we award funding in terms of deliverability, conditions applied, the percentage of funding on offer, whether or not we introduce funding caps or match funding rules. And this will be with full legal and financial guidance, which we are in the process of gaining from our legal and finance colleagues at the moment. So I'll leave that there. It's very much the beginning, but it's just the criteria that we're here to seek agreement to today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we want to jump straight onto questions at all or any comments. Charlotte, do you want to?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Bethan. I did have a few questions. I wondered why the criteria weren't developed before, because obviously we've known about the fund for quite a while. So that was one question. I also wondered, because obviously there's been mention about it being available for PCC-funded projects, but also external sort of applications as well. And I just wondered if there was a sort of understanding at this point about what the percentage would be, so like how many would be from external versus PCC, because it does feel that I think it would be a wasted opportunity if we can't make this more available to external groups, particularly community groups, councillors from other wards for their projects for greening, because I think the idea of the spirit of the fund was that it's about getting people to participate in the local area and green their local area. So I completely understand why there would be more rigorous sort of processes and procedures in place, and I completely agree with all of that, and that makes a lot of sense. But I do worry a bit about some of the expectations of this criteria, because I think if you're a community group, you might not be able to evidence all of these things. Like, for example, having a proposal will provide X percentage increase in ward canopy cover. I mean, only really the councillor is going to have that really detailed information about existing tree cover and how, you know, the lay person can increase tree cover in their area. So I worry that it might be going a bit too overboard with the sort of requirements. And just from sort of my own perspective of obviously reviewing the criteria for it and also trying to apply to the fund myself, basically found that the questions that are being asked are like more detailed than the Big Lottery and Sports England, who are obviously major funding providers and you know, are properly audited and have sort of national recognition. So I do understand that we need to make sure that our funds are being used wisely, but I think there's a balance to be struck between that and making them truly accessible to the wider community.
I don't know if Bethan or Zoe want to jump back on before I...
There's a number of questions there which I'm having to unpack. In terms of the first one, which was why hasn't there been a funding criteria? It's a relatively new portfolio, and it's the new budget that was allocated just after the elections, I presume. And that's essentially why. So we're trying to work through this at the moment and get it right, because we don't want to get it wrong. There hasn't been criteria, and any funding has been at discretion of the portfolio holder, more than one portfolio holder, because there used to be a number of portfolio holders who would approve greening funding. We are now trying to introduce that process. So that's the first question. What was the second one?
The other question was about the breakdown of the fund and what's likely to be spent on PCC-led funds, projects, and external projects. That was the second question.
There's no decisions been made on that yet. I think there was a third one, wasn't there?
One was about the criteria and it being, sorry, I can't look at you and speak in the mic at the same time, so it's a really weird position to be in. The third question was about the criteria and making sure that we get the balance right between, you know, making sure that we are rigorous in, you know, making sure that people who are applying are doing it for the right reasons. We spend the money wisely, I get that, but balancing it with being accessible to community groups in particular, because I think the criteria is perhaps a little bit too rigorous. For example, at the top of the application it says about proposal will provide X% increase in ward canopy cover. Community groups aren't going to have that kind of information other than the council.
So just to clarify, that was an example of what kind of priorities might feature under Part A, and that would be the type of thing that we would probably assess. So that is literally just an example of how, if we're going into a funding round in autumn, we might say we want to support projects which deliver X amount of canopy cover increase, or we want to support those projects which fall in the lowest 10% lower super output areas, for example. They're just examples, and that hasn't been decided. There is a level of information where evidence will be required that would probably come out through our assessment. But we're just trying to, Zoe's actually got quite a lot of experience of applying for external greening funding bids, and we also have experience of having to jump through all of those bureaucratic hoops as well. We're not trying to make it too difficult for community groups, we're trying to make sure that we get it right and cover our backs.
Sorry, just to add to that as well, because it's something that not a lot of people know. So with my previous role, so obviously climate change and green recovery, not many people know there were two different pots of money, and one came under Regen, so that would have been former Councillor Dowling, and the other pot came under Councillor Ashmore's portfolio. When obviously this new cabinet role came into fruition, so to speak, so that was mid sort of May, wasn't it? And then obviously from mid-May onwards, we realised that obviously with funding going forward, we would need to look at criteria going forward. Of course, obviously personal situation you've had, I completely understand that application was submitted while we were doing that whole process, and it did highlight to us that we definitely need a process for criteria. So that's where we found ourselves now. Obviously, hopefully your situation is sorted, but it's also highlighted where we need to move forward and what changes we need to make and what we really need to look at in detail. So it's definitely been a learning lesson from our side, but of course where things, it seems like it's a long period of time when I say between mid-May into now, but it's not been quite that easy. So that's where we find ourselves now, but that's why we're hoping with this coming forward, and I think it might actually be September rather than October, ideally, that we bring this back to you so that you can have a look at it, and obviously hopefully go through that process, make sure that we can look at as many community groups, as many projects coming forward, go through that round, and then obviously make that decision so that we get to the new planting season and we just green up the whole city as best as possible, because I'm so fed up personally of seeing all this grey across the city. We've got all these wonderful community groups, all these wonderful projects going forward. We just want to make sure that the criteria is there so that everyone has a fair chance going forward from now, and that they can have the opportunity to, get some cash, really. So I hope that's helpful anyway. I don't know if you've got any other questions or comments at all at the moment, or...
That sounds good. Thank you.
Just a comment, really. I think it's a really good idea. It's got to start somewhere, so I'm all for it.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else got any comments or questions at the moment. No? Well, I'm pleased. I'm happy to approve this going forward at the moment. It's the first step that we need to be doing to make sure that we get criteria in, to make sure that we can start doing these rounds of funding, that we can start getting greening projects going forward, and that we've got a good process to do it. Now that we've got this pot of money and it's under one portfolio, not split all over the place, I think it will make the whole process easier, and then we could go forward and get more projects forward, like the one that you've been doing. So thank you. So that's that one. Right, I believe we're moving across to Mr. Waggett now, so I'd love to hear what you have to say today.
Thank you, Chair. This is to introduce the low carbon projects fund paper today. The intention of this, of presenting this to this portfolio, is to take this on to full council, and I'll ask Wayne to say a few bits about that process and what's required. But in terms of the purpose of the report, we're looking to seek approval to borrow for projects that will reduce carbon emissions by financing renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. the projects funded will have a financial return on investment within the prudential borrowing rules. The paper also just provides a bit of narrative around some of the nature of some of the projects, and there's some examples which I'll maybe highlight a couple of as we go through as well. And I just wanted to, or rather the paper wants to show the sort of quantum of the carbon reductions possible by implementing something like this. So essentially, you might describe this as sort of the low-hanging fruit of things, the things that you can actually finance in a kind of traditional sort of financial appraisal, financial business model kind of way. So the recommendations are that the portfolio holder notes and approves the following recommendations for onward approval from full council, at full council. So approves the aims of the borrowing facility in the context of the climate emergency and the council's net zero carbon ambitions. That subject to satisfactory financial appraisal, the delegated authority is given to the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services and the Section 151 officer in consultation with the City Solicitor and portfolio holder of climate change and the environment to use unsupported borrowing. 2, approve financing of projects associated with renewable energy, approve the financing of projects associated with energy efficiency, and to approve the financing of projects associated with other climate change mitigation where there's a clear financial rationale for its implementation. That third point obviously leaves open something that was sort of almost kind of haven't quite anticipated yet, but could be worth us doing in due course. I think on that point, it's worth saying that we have already had a facility similar to this over the last few years through the PV Investment Fund and through the utilities capital borrowing, utilities capital budget as well, which have both been used in exactly the same way, basically through a delegated approval process to borrow. Recommendation 2.3 is to approve a borrowing facility of up to 30 million to be invested in projects as described above, subject to financial feasibility in the council's limit of indebtedness. It's noted that these energy and climate projects may be implemented upon the council's own building portfolio and land, or may be implemented on the buildings and assets of other organisations within the city. And finally notes that the Energy Services team will continue to identify and seek external funding opportunities to contribute to these initiatives and others as well. So this is really looking at non-domestic energy efficiency, low carbon projects. It's not trying to do things in the domestic sphere per se. That's certainly not its primary intention, but just a kind of note to say that domestic sphere has been, or the domestic sector has been picked up by the work of the kind of the things that we do under the Switched On Portsmouth banner, and we'll continue to do that. Not obviously, this won't lessen anything that we do in that space. I was just going to highlight a couple of, or point to a couple, section 4.5, where we talk about a pipeline of projects that we would invest in here. Some of the pipeline of projects, or some of the projects within that pipeline, are better developed than others. So we have, for instance, Lakeside North Harbour, where we're really almost ready to put a spade in the ground there. We also, the school academy, actually the school we've used there is Mayfield School, so we're working with Mayfield School at the moment. Again, that's a pretty oven-ready project. There are other projects which we haven't even begun to work on yet, but we thought that £30 million would be a good starting point to give us some confidence that we can actually start approaching some, or start looking for some of these projects, whether in our own buildings or also with some of the maybe the anchor institutions within the city as well. Oh, do you want to say a few bits, Wayne, about the? Sorry, not just afterthought.
Turned off. What to say? Yeah, it's just to say that obviously this is a climate change and environment portfolio holder initiative, but because of the fact it requires a £30 million unsupported borrowing, that's not a decision that can be made at this committee, so it has to go to full council because it's a change to the capital programme, and that's why we bring the report here, and then it will be considered at full council as well.
Brilliant. Thank you both for that. Before I say anything, perhaps I'll let everybody else have a say. I don't know if anyone's got any comments at the moment, or whether you're saving them for full council. I don't know. Charlotte?
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And yeah, I think the initiative is great. And being a school governor of a school that is really keen to get solar on their roof, I know that this will be of great interest to a lot of people across the city. I just had a couple of questions. Firstly, just to double check, will you be working really closely with Christina to make sure that where we are making investments, it's in the places where we can have the biggest impact in terms of obviously reducing down our carbon emissions? Because, yeah, she's doing amazing work of quantifying things, and it would just be great if it could sort of dovetail so we've got that sort of maximum impact. And then I did have a question about why this came up now and perhaps why it wasn't in the budget, because obviously it is quite a significant amount of money, and it would have been good if we had the chance to properly scrutinise it in that forum.
I'll start at the top with the Christina one then. I suppose for the millions of viewers at home, Christina Downey is our principal climate change officer within the council. We are working very closely with Christina to try and identify projects. And actually, we see the work that Christina's doing with particularly people like the Anchor institutions, where we're looking at this fund anyway, has been really important in terms of getting a foot in the door, if that's quite the right term, or working with them to be able to better articulate the reduction in carbon that can be brought about by these projects. I think if we reflect, or if I reflect on some of the work that my team's done previously, where we've been working with things like the utilities capital budget or the PV investment fund, I think there's sometimes a danger that we are our key focus is getting across the line in terms of a financial appraisal, and actually the carbon has been sometimes a little bit of an afterthought. I think it's fair to say that Christina has sort of realigned us a little bit on that, but also it allows us to have sort of one version of the truth of these projects that are going forward. So it's not left up to the individual project manager to determine how much carbon is going to be saved, but actually it's centrally logged. There's a central journal, if you like, of all of this stuff that's going on. So that building is using X amount of is emitting X amount of tons of CO2e per annum, for instance, and by the implementation of these projects, we will be saving this. At least that's what our initial estimate says, our initial model says, and then going back and actually saying that is reflected within the electricity and gas use, which is typically going to be the metric that we're looking at within the property going forward as well. So it's given us a really good framework and sort of to hang the projects around, and actually give some sort of I suppose a sort of mass around which to hang these projects, if you like, if that makes sense. Oh, and I'll let Wayne pick up the question about the.
Yeah, so traditionally the council's capital programme is agreed usually in February of each year, but because we're using unsupported borrowing and not cash corporate resources, we can bring a report at any time to full council. So rather than wait until February 23, we wanted to bring this forward now. The other thing that's slightly different about this is that we haven't said it's 30 million and it will be dead on £30 million worth of projects. Effectively, it's a facility. So Andrew and his team are constantly getting people approaching them saying, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? This just makes it much more democratically more efficient for us to be able to get projects away and get things in. So some of the projects might be, we've got solar panels on a building now, and we know more about battery technology. Well, we might need £10,000 to do that, but because it's capital, if I was to do this through the norm of to wait until February, I'd have to do a separate report just for £10,000-15,000 worth of expenditure. So this fund essentially gives us the ability to be able to deal with these projects as they come up, and some of them will be 11 million, but some of them might be much smaller. And as you refer to, schools, for example, there is a facility for us, if we can make a business case to say it will reduce energy for the city council overall, then it's worth us doing, and we can repay our borrowing and do it much more agilely than waiting until February.
I think just to build on that slightly, the agility is one of the important things here. What we've said in the report is that although this will encompass, Portsmouth City Council's portfolio of buildings, is our first and foremost kind of focus on this. It will allow us to act slightly more commercially, I suppose, in a more agile way with commercial entities within the city as well. Sometimes as Wayne articulated with the process regards the sort of council's cash budget, if you like, every year, that's quite a slow process end to end to be able to enter into with any confidence enter into a conversation with a commercial entity about whether or not you could put solar panels on their roof and create a business model under that. This will allow us to do that in a much more flexible and agile way, effectively.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I should have clarified what I meant. Not the autumn budget. God, that's the wrong government. The budget of this year. Sorry, I was referring to not the budget next year. I wouldn't want things to be kept till next year. I was just asking about why we didn't discuss it at the budget just gone in this February. Just to clarify, but don't worry, it's okay.
Yeah, I think some of the initiatives that we're looking at the moment wouldn't have been fully formed by the time we'd have got to the sort of budget setting process. So that, and you know, it's some of the projects are quite big. Particularly one that's mentioned in here is quite a big project, and you know, cost of living at the moment and things are changing. So if we'd have gone and said, well, actually, we think the project's 9 million, and then it's now 11 million, I'd have to come back to full council again to get another approval for the extra 2 million to adjust the capital programme. So that was the reason, essentially.
Thank you. Do you have any? No worries. I just want to say in regards to this, with the briefings that you've given me, Andrew, on this, I think it's a really good idea. I think one of them, apart from the cost of living at the moment, we know that go outside and see what it's like at the moment. One of the huge issues that we've got as a city, country, world is the climate emergency. So having a fund like this, rather than Andrew and the team having to come back and forth, means that we can get on and get some of this stuff done. I know, for example, the use of this could make, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, it could provide bigger solar panel systems than previously expected for some of our projects, which would mean a bigger reduction in carbon and saving of energy and money as well. So I just want to check, with this £30 million potentially, do you know roughly, Andrew, how much carbon that could save per year at all? Yeah,
I mean, you can extrapolate it essentially out from the from the table here that we've put in section 4.5, which talks to, I suppose, around about a third of that being spent. I would expect there are other things that we could do that would save more carbon per pound spent than say, for instance, solar canopies. So therefore, and batteries, which, although they are an energy efficiency measure, although they help to enable solar to go on, they're not in and of themselves it's not in and of itself a reduction in carbon reducing technology. So if you extrapolate that out, if you say that this is near its AMA is 1,000 tons of carbon per annum, then you would say about 3,000 tons of carbon saved per annum from what you've got. Wayne's just done the maths for me because he could see me floundering a little bit, and it actually comes out about 2,400. I think it'll be somewhere north of that, just simply because of the fact that we'll be doing some things which don't involve batteries, don't involve things like solar canopies, which are relatively expensive, pounds per ton of carbon saved. It is a rough estimate because, as I say, some of the projects aren't established yet, and it is a figure that will, year on year, because of the decarbonisation of the grid, as long as this looks at electricity projects, and most of the projects by the nature of these things are reducing electricity, then because of the decarbonisation of the grid, it will fall year by year. Your other question, Councillor Barrett, which was, yes, going back to existing, so on making, I suppose, the ability to extend things like solar PV systems. So this can be done in two ways. Effectively, we can go back to some of our existing schemes within on some of our buildings, of which we're aware of quite a few, where they were put in at the time and they're of a size that it was there to hit a feed-in tariff target or something like that. With the cost of solar having fallen in terms of its capex and the cost of electricity going up in terms of the cost per tariff, cost per unit rate, we can now go back and we can extend some of those arrays. And in fact, we've already done some of that where we had a budget available within the HRA. We've done that on some of our sheltered housing blocks. We're now going to look at our commercial portfolio of buildings to a much greater extent. The other place where we can increase the sizes of things like solar arrays is the example in 4.5 Mayfield School, where the solar PV system at Mayfield was going to be, I can't remember what the original size of it was going to be, but it was basically there to get it over the line in terms of planning. What we did is we looked at that and said, all parties could benefit more by putting a larger system on there, taking it outside of the cost of the build, and we'll go on and we'll retrofit it once the new building's built. So rather than it because it was the DFE paying for the build at Mayfield, they were more than happy to take some more capital out of the project. We were able to step in and say, look, we can do this, and we can do this on the basis of this financial appraisal. We can extend that out. School saves more money. Council, returns on its investment, and the I suppose the key thing is in the context of this in this portfolio is that the amount of carbon reduced goes up as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. I think something that also made me feel a bit better, because £30 million is a lot of money. We all know it is. But when we spoke, I understand that obviously it'll all be subject to financial appraisal, and things won't go ahead unless they are able to pay for themselves by returning on everything. So that made me feel a little bit better. But in general, I think this is such an important thing to be able to do. Obviously, we're doing everything we can as a council, especially with the target that we have to hit by 2030. But also, we've been doing a lot of work, as Andrew knows, well, as a lot of people knows, with sort of our anchor institutions across the city, our big employers. Obviously, there's some stuff going on that we are in talks with people, and this gives us the opportunity to not just help ourselves as a council, but to look outwards and help other people as well. So I think it's a really good opportunity. So I'm happy to note the report, but I also think it's so vitally important this does go to full council tomorrow for a discussion, because this is, like I said, I think it's one of the biggest projects and things that could happen this year and over coming years, and it's going to affect every ward of this city as well and all our residents. So I think it's really important that this does go tomorrow to full council. We can all have a discussion about it, and I'm hopeful that it will be supported tomorrow and we can just get on with doing some of these big projects. So thank you very much for that. So yes, I'm happy to approve this going to council tomorrow and to note it. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it, isn't it? So thank you very much, everybody. For all the hundreds of people that are watching, hopefully, I hope you keep safe in this warm weather.